Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Schematic Mind Palace podcast. This time around, we will be reading a book, but not just any book, a book of someone that has inspired me since I first thought, what is my alter ego? When I was first posed the question, the first name that I came to had to, of course, be Alan Watts. Alan Watts is quite certainly my premier alter ego because the way he speaks, the way he conveys information, I just love so much. I love so much. I've learned so many things. One of my favorite quotes that is just so central to, I feel like, my being is something from William Blake that he pulled out during one of his lectures, that the fool who persists in his folly will become wise. I don't know if you can fully read that on the pillow, but it's on the pillow. The fool that persists in his folly will become wise. And similarly, this book that I'll be reading is called The Wisdom of Insecurity, a message for the age of anxiety. So as such, it really deconstructs what we believe to be wisdom. Similar to the William Blake quote that he so auspiciously provided. That quote is so powerful in how it deconstructs our belief that you need to just continue to consume knowledge to become wise, instead of pushing beyond what people believe to be sane. Similarly, when people feel anxious, the instinct is to run away, is to push it away, to repress, to suppress. However, Alan has a different opinion in this book, as I can read the excerpt. This book is an exploration of man's quest for psychological security and his efforts to find spiritual and intellectual certainty in religion and philosophy. Alan Watts writes with a conviction that no theme could be more appropriate in a time when human life seems to be so particularly insecure and uncertain. He maintains that our insecurity is the result of trying to be secure, and that ironically, salvation and sanity consists in the most radical recognition that we have no way of saving ourselves. Alan is, of course, the foremost interpreter of Eastern thought, in particular Zen Buddhism to the West. His books on the philosophy and psychology of religion have been in great demand over the last 30 years, according to the back of the book. But yeah, no, Alan Watts is absolutely incredible. And even though he was a troubled soul, I will not pretend like he is someone that was perfect in any ways. He would speak and give such evocative and provocative insight behind parenthood and the importance of how to raise your children, whereas he himself apparently was not the best father. He talked all about not needing things such as substances, psychedelics, to achieve enlightenment. One of his famous quotes was always, once you hear the message that psychedelics provide, why do you keep answering the phone? You got the message. Why do you keep coming? Very good question. Not necessarily a complete damnation of it, but just a question. Because he was not perfect in how he passed away due to alcoholism. And when people would ask, what would the Buddha think of how much you're drinking and killing yourself? Alan Watts would always answer in the most Alan Watts of ways. He would say, well, I drink in an enlightened way. Oh well. It is what it is. This is the course that life takes. And I felt like I needed to preface how troubled he was and how much there are things that we can still look back upon with inspiration despite the flaws of his character. Because in the end, we are all just humans trying to get by. And his purpose here was clearly to leave these seeds of wisdom for us, even if he couldn't personally follow through on them himself, because he wasn't strong enough himself, is what I would imagine. Anyways, let's start with the preface. I have always been fascinated by the law of reversed effort. Sometimes I call it the backwards law. When you try to stay on the surface of the water, you sink. But when you try to sink, you float. When you hold your breath, you lose it, which immediately calls to mind an ancient and much neglected saying, "Whosoever would save his soul shall lose it." This book is an exploration of this law in relation to man's quest for psychological security, and to his efforts to find spiritual and intellectual certainty in religion and philosophy. It is written in the conviction that no theme could be more appropriate in a time when human life seems to be so particularly insecure and uncertain. I'm realizing this is just what's written on the back of the book again, but bear with me. It maintains that this insecurity is the result of trying to be secure, and that contrawise, okay, it's a little bit different, salvation and sanity consists in the most radical recognition that we have no way of saving ourselves. This begins to sound like something from Alice Through the Looking Glass, of which this book is a sort of psychological equivalent, or philosophical equivalent. For the reader will frequently find himself in a topsy-turvy world, which the normal order of things seem to be completely reversed. And common sense turned inside out and upside down. Those who have read some of my former books, such as Behold the Spirit and The Supreme Identity, will find things that seem to be total contradictions of much that I have said before. This, however, is only true in minor aspects, for I have discovered that the essence and crux of what I was trying to say in those books was seldom understood. The framework and the context of my thoughts often hid the meaning. My intention here is to approach the same meaning from entirely different premises, and in terms which do not confuse thought with a multitude of irrelevant associations which time and tradition have hung upon them. In these books, I was concerned to vindicate certain principles of religion, philosophy, and metaphysic by reinterpreting them. This was, I think, like putting legs on a snake, unnecessary and confusing, because only doubtful truths need defense. This book, however, is the spirit of the Chinese sage Lao Tzu, that master of the law of reversed effort, who declared that those who justify themselves do not convince, that to know truth one must get rid of knowledge, and that nothingness is more powerful and creative than emptiness, from which men shrink. Here then, my aim is to show backwards fashion, and that those essential realities of religion and metaphysics are often vindicated in doing without them, and manifested in being destroyed. It is my happy duty to acknowledge that the preparation of this book has been made possible by the generosity of the foundation established by the Franklin J. Matchett of New York, a man who devoted much of his life to the problems of science and metaphysics, being one of those somewhat rare businessmen who are not wholly absorbed in the vicious circle of making money to make money to make money. The Matchett Foundation is therefore dedicated to the pursuit of metaphysical studies, and needless to say, it is, to me, a sign of insight and imagination on their part that they have been willing to interest themselves in so contrary an approach to metaphysical knowledge. Alan Watts. Alan W. Watts. So yeah, that was just the acknowledgement. Before we get onto the first chapter, I feel like I just wanted to give a background behind why I'm doing this series, why I'm getting into this book. Because yeah, when I first started reading it, it was so triggering I couldn't go forward. I got stuck within like the first 2 chapters, so I'm hoping this series, dedicating myself to reading books like these that make me feel very insecure and make me feel like I'm being talked to directly, are going to be completed because I've made the dedication. Similar to when I started this podcast, as many of you remember. I didn't start with episode 000. Oh wait, no, I already missed, I messed up the punchline. I didn't start with episode 1, I started with episode 0001 because I immediately made the commitment to 1,000 episodes, and that early commitment has pushed me beyond the initial growing pains, and I still feel like there's so much more to be growing in this podcast. Obviously, I mean, to you 2 or 3 people watching, this can get bigger. I mean, my aim at the time was like a Joe Rogan-ish level, because just looking at how many episodes he did, I was like, what? That is crazy. But no wonder he's so inspiring, such a fascinating person to listen to, because he just did it so much. So I feel like similarly, if I just keep going with this, keep reading books that I find interesting and inspiring, and perhaps more importantly, a bit difficult for me to push through, this series will help me push through it. And I'm very excited to, in general, speak from a position that isn't wholly my own. This is a book I've chosen, but these are not my words. And perhaps, since I am still so young, so naive, the fact that I'm speaking from someone with far more experience will lead to a bit more credibility within the Mind Palace, or whatever. Who really cares? All I know is I'm having a great time. I know Alan Watts wouldn't want it any other way. So, for all of you listening, thank you very much, and I'll see you for the next episode. It'll be a great time. Can't wait.